to start with you, Joseph, because I know the Ministry of Finance is carrying the burden. And colleagues, don't look at the questions on the sheet because we need to disrupt the conversation today. I didn't want to box them into certain things, so I'm going to push you a bit on the panel. So let's start with you, Joseph. You were listening to all the conversations that has happened this morning. You listened to Raymond on a number of things that he talked about, from bonds to credit ratings to PPPs and others. But how can we finance Uganda's development agenda sustainably? And no big English. Raymond, what was your word again? No big grammar. No big grammar. You know, I know you were asked to talk about the public investment financing strategy, but really financing Uganda's agenda goes beyond public financing. So what can you tell us in terms of where are we? Where are we going? No big grammar. Over to you. You have about 5 minutes to dazzle the crowd. Is it working?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Right Honorable, and all the distinguished members in the room. I bring you apologies from the PSST and greetings as well. Is unable to join us here. As you're aware, we are running a post-budget engagement series across the country, and that is largely the reason he's unable to be here. And he's asked me to represent him, which is a very privileged honor on my part. You've asked, where are we on this issue? Now, the very reason we are having this discussion is what our keynote speaker really nailed down. We are discussing financing largely because there is a deficit, there is a gap. The ability of the country to raise its resources currently, or the level at which we are able to raise financing from our domestic sources, is lower than the level of investment that we need to make for our development agenda. And if you look at the numbers, both, if you put our public sector and the private sector together, we are investing in the order of about 26% of our GDP. And yet, the money that Ugandans as a totality can put aside is about 20% of GDP. So we have a gap of 6% of GDP that we have to fill by looking at financing from external sources. Significant as that gap is, we have reason to celebrate. We have come from a long, long way. Over a decade ago, as Ugandans, we were only saving about maybe 10% of our GDP. And so the fact that we've been able to raise our savings to GDP ratio by that margin is something that we need to celebrate and applaud the Ugandan citizens for. Where are these savings? Where are they being held? The Retirement Benefits Regulatory Authority estimates that about 12% of GDP is the figure around which of the value of the money that Ugandans are able to put aside for their retirement life. And the other 8% also comes in different forms here and there, including in our commercial banks. And so the discussion we really need to address, one then, is how do we raise the incomes of Ugandans? If you look at the results from the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, they indicate that on average, food accounts for about maybe 46% of expenditure of households. When you combine food, healthcare, housing, and education, that figure goes almost to the margin of 75 or 80%. And that means that the incomes that are left for you to be able to put aside some money really to finance your investments is very low. So the cure is the issue of raising household incomes. What are we going to do to make sure that the everyday household of Uganda has the ability to do some work and earn an income, whether that's a salary or a profit from their enterprise? And I think that's the challenge that keeps us awake in the Ministry of Finance. And we are very happy that we are walking that journey under the able leadership of our government and the support of the partners in the room. And of course, our private sector that is out there generating opportunities for people to earn money and be able to save. So I would like to start from that point and just set that scene, and then we can take it forward from there, Elsie. Thank you.
Thank you. You saw that the clapping was a bit weak because we're expecting more from you, Joseph. Because I think you've answered a couple of things that I think that I'm trying to connect what you're trying to say. The more we can help people to get more incomes, then more savings, more domestic resources. So the question then is, how do we raise the incomes? That's the first question. But also importantly, I just wanted you to connect back to some of the things the government is doing. How do we optimize some of those instruments that you have? You now have a public investment financing strategy. You heard some of the things that Raymond talked about. What can we do? What more can we do to accelerate delivery of the National Development Plan, which by extension is our SDGs? So no big English, no big grammar, unpack it for us.
Well, thank you. When it comes to what is it that government is doing to this end, I think the first thing we all have to realize is that for every country, the greatest resource we have is our people. There is no resource more important than your people. And if you took notice during the budget speech, one of the heartening statistics that was contained in that speech is the fact that Uganda has been able to raise the life expectancy in this country from 43 to 63 years in one generation. There are not many countries on the continent or even in the world that have been able to deliver that. What does that mean? It means that if you have more Ugandans living longer, we are going to have, one, a larger share of our population in the working age bracket. With a larger share of the population in the working age bracket, you have less dependents per household, and that means that families are able then to save more resources to turn that into investment. So I want to lay that foundation in terms of human capital development is priority. And of course, we walk that talk. These are not just words. As you will know, the Human Capital Development Program now accounts for the largest share of our national budget. And that's because we believe that people are our greatest resource. When it comes to other factors of production, we know in the Ministry of Finance, we have a vision. We are building a competitive economy for national development. How does this competitiveness happen? One, we aim to make sure that the cost of doing business in Uganda is low and reducing. That is important because when it comes to competition, whether it is domestic direct investment or foreign direct investment, people are looking at a return on investment. And so as a country, we have to make sure that the cost of doing business in the country is low so that the opportunities and incentives can be maximized. And so what are we doing? One, from a public investment point of view, is we are lowering the big cost drivers for our businesses in the economy. And that is why we are focused on closing the infrastructure gap, whether that is the transport infrastructure, digital infrastructure, or institutional infrastructure. The second thing is what our keynote speaker alluded to, the kind of investments that are critical to drive sustainable development have a very long gestation period. They have a very long period of maturity. Let me put it that way. So you need access to money, which is commonly referred to as patient capital. Money you can put in an investment for 10, 15 years. And the challenge, of course, we have currently in the country is that a lot of the deposits in our banking sector are short-term, in the range of 5 to 7 years. And so unlocking patient capital is very key to drive the kind of investments. People need decent housing. You need to drive your industrial agenda. You cannot do that with commercial rated loans. And so we are making available channels for development finance, capitalizing Uganda Development Bank. And we are also working on improving the performance of our capital markets because they provide cheaper non-bank financing. And some of you in the room are players in that space. It's very heartening that in the last 4 years,
Joseph, you have a minute now.
Thank you. The savings that Ugandans have been able to put together, for example, through collective investment schemes, have more than quadrupled from about 400 billion shillings to almost 1.8 trillion. These are just Ugandans putting aside money and bringing it to fund managers to manage through the capital markets. And the other thing, of course, is legal reform. We are putting in place a number of business reform measures to make sure that it is easier and quicker for people to engage in business. And then raising labor productivity and also making serviced land accessible through the developments in the industrial parks will lower the cost for these industrialists that eventually provide opportunities for jobs. So that is the logic or the theory of change we are pursuing and supporting, and we can get into the specifics as the conversation goes. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Please, Mr. Enyimu has tried. You better clap for him. A lot of reflections around household incomes, lowering the cost of business, improving life expectancy so you can work longer, save more, so the country can use patient capital, capitalizing UDB. I'm very interested, and I hope we can unpack some of these conversations later on the capital market, and also how we smartly use the retirement funding, which is about 12%. I think that's big, and let's reflect on that. So I want to link it back to your brother from the Bank of Uganda, the central bank, to also reflect a bit with us. From where you sit, what do you see? And what are some of the instruments that, financing instruments that we can be able to leverage? And also listening in to Joseph and of course earlier on to Raymond Gilpin, what are the things that you can say? I'm giving you sort of a room to be able to maneuver. I know you were supposed to speak around the agriculture credit facility that is more specific. You can also link that in as you go along. But again, no big grammar. No big grammar from Central Bank. For all of us listening, lay women and men, unpack it to us. What is there? What can we do differently to be able to finance Uganda's development agenda from where you sit as Bank of Uganda?
Thank you, moderator. Honorable Minister, the invited guests, my fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alex Luanja. I'm the Deputy Director heading the Agricultural Credit Facility and the Small Business Recovery Fund at Bank of Uganda. I'm here to deliver greetings from Bank of Uganda and apologies from the Deputy Governor, who was supposed to be with us here, but because of other engagements, he has asked me to come and have a conversation with you this morning. Back to the question. Right now, when we talk about attainment of the SDGs and talking to the financing frameworks, we cannot forget to know that all what we are talking about have to be within a stable economy. And at Bank of Uganda, we are committed and we remain to be committed to ensure that there is price stability and a sound financial system that can support socioeconomic transformation in Uganda. And if you can recall, during the beginning of this week, a monetary policy was read by the Deputy Governor. And because of the prudential microeconomic policies that have been put in place ever since we were struck by COVID-19 and some other external pressures like the Ukraine war, they have greatly impacted on global economies, including that of Uganda. But at the wisdom of Ministry of Finance and Bank of Uganda, policies have been put in place to ensure that these economic shocks are minimized and that our economic development remains on track. To come back to your question, Madam Moderator, there are several avenues where this country can leverage on in its attainment or financing the attainment of the SDG goals. For example, I'll talk about the government securities. We have the government securities, talk about the treasury bills, talk about the government bonds. These are some of the things that the government can leverage on by, because when you talk of attainment, when we talk about the government, we are even meaning the people. Because once you improve the household income, you as an individual, then you are talking or speaking to SDG goal 1, no poverty, because you'll be able to invest. But now the government can also leverage on internal borrowing from the financial sectors at relatively low interest rates. But what we are talking about, before I go to the other side of the government, what about we, the individuals? How do we improve the household incomes in relation to implementation of the SDG goals? So that's why I'm calling upon that the public that is listening to us this morning can go and get in touch with the central bank and find out how they can invest in the treasury bonds, treasury bills, such that with that kind of investment, you'll be sure that there will be some income improvement in your households. And once there is income improvement in the households, you'll definitely have a better life. In addition to that, like you said, I'm here particularly to talk to the Agricultural Credit Facility and the Small Business Recovery Fund. You may realize that ever since this government came into power, several economic interventions have been put in place to ensure that Uganda's economy goes back to its track. And these economic interventions, to mention but a few, includes the Vision 2040, with set targets of improving and ensuring that Uganda's economy moves to a middle income status. Notable among these, you'll find that several sectors have been helped, they have been financed: mining, farming, agriculture, that's to say, the commerce and trade. All these have been funded. But allow me to speak to specifically the agriculture sector, because this is the sector we still continue to believe that is the backbone of Uganda's economy. Now, in 2009, you remember those days, it was not easy for somebody who is involved in the agriculture sector to go and get a loan easily from commercial banks, because commercial banks were regarding agricultural sector as a sector that was a bit risky. So now the government sat down in its wisdom and said, now what do we do? How do we support the agriculture? Because agriculture is our cash cow. It provides us with food, it gives us income, and it promotes our livelihood in Uganda here. So in 2009, they established what we call the Agricultural Credit Facility. You may call it SCF in abbreviation. This is a facility that was put in place by the government of Uganda together with the private sector. And when I talk about the private sector, I'm referring to the participating financial institutions, the financial institutions that are implementing this facility, the commercial banks, credit institutions, and the microfinance institutions. So they came together and agreed.
Mr. Nwanji, you need to keep it short and sweet, because I don't think we want to go so much into how the credit facility functions, but what it means when it comes to financing the development agenda of Uganda. And so keep it short and sweet, because I think you said some things that I would want to come back on in the plenary. For a laywoman, I'm wondering if you say people should come and bring their money to the central bank and buy bonds, then I'm asking myself, are you taking money away from what should have gone into other development where, because you want individuals to make money from the bonds? And what are the risks to some of these things, which I think we need to also unpack? And then you talk about the fact that agriculture is a cash cow. So whilst we have a lot of about 70% leaning on agriculture, the contribution to GDP is lower. So why would it be a cash cow? So these are the things that I think will come back in the plenary for you to clarify. But for now, if you can keep it short, because we have other two panelists, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who want to ask questions on really what are we talking about when it comes to the financing frameworks and how that can push forward the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals here and the Uganda's Vision 2040. So over to you, Mr. Nwanji, but short and sweet.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to keep it short. So what I was looking at was how the household income can be improved. But to go back to what you have alluded to, this government can internally borrow to ensure that SDGs are implemented, can borrow internally and externally. What I was looking at as well was to see to it that the economy is not only supported by government, but even the households. So that's why I was going into these other schemes that were put in place to ensure that the household income and livelihoods do improve. Like we can also remember the Small Business Recovery Fund was also established to fight the impact of COVID-19, because COVID-19 ravaged all the economies globally. But Uganda had to sit down in 2021 and they established the Small Business Recovery Fund to ensure that the businesses that were gravely affected by COVID-19 could come back onto their feet and be in a position to do their operations, earn income, and provide employment to the Ugandans. So in summary, like you have said, that we are looking at the implementation of the SDGs. So once somebody has got the income, then you will have implemented SDG goal number 1 of no poverty. That once you have food in your households, like what agriculture is telling us, and what I'm advocating for, that people should go for the ACF to improve agricultural production, then you are also speaking to SDG 2, where we say there must be enough food and therefore no hunger. And the SDG 3, or once you have food and you have income, therefore you have good health and a good well-being. I thought, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Nwanji. We'll come back to you because we expect more from the Bank of Uganda beyond the, the stability situation and then the security and bonds and the facility. What are the instruments? I think we need to push the conversation a bit beyond the classic. We have a facility, we have this, we have that. Are they functioning? These are all questions. But what more? The world is moving. What more can we do? But now I want to turn our attention to Mr. Ndorere of the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives. There's a lot that is happening, and we are talking about regional cooperation. Trade plays an important role in terms of Uganda's competitiveness and many more. And I'd like you to focus a bit more around how can we leverage an instrument that is before us. Africa trades amongst itself only 16.6%. Yet we have a population of 1.4 billion people. Uganda has milk, and pouring the milk sometimes in gutters, literally speaking, when other African countries are importing. We import more tea from outside of the continent, yet the tea is produced here. And these are some of the paradoxes we have to deal with, and this is why we have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. So how do you see trade as an instrument for financing the development agenda of Uganda?
Thank you, moderator, the Honorable Minister, and the UNDP resident coordinator, and all protocols observed. First, before I jump into your question, let me apologize for having been the cause for the gender imbalance, because my permanent secretary, Ms. Gerard Sari, was supposed to be here, but as we speak, she's engaged in another endeavor to get market access for Uganda. So she asked me to stand in.
Can you speak up a bit?
As we speak, she's engaged in another agenda to find market access for Uganda products, specifically in Algeria. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have been asked to confine my response or my discussion on the African Continental Free Trade Area. But before I do that, I want to bring to you a statement which was a remark which was made by the former WTO Secretary General Pascolami. He said that negotiating trade markets or bilaterals or regional recs only makes trade possible. It is up to the countries that negotiate those recs to make trade happen. So in the past, we must admit that we have gone and liberalized our tariffs, tried to remove non-tariff barriers, which makes trade possible. But how much have we done to make trade happen? That's the question that we must bring, I believe, to this table this morning. Because making trade possible is, if I'm to give an analogy, is like building a school with very beautiful desks, very beautiful computers and everything, but you have no students or pupils. How do you attract those pupils? That's the question I want to confine myself today, this morning. In the ministry specifically, if you look at what we have negotiated with other stakeholders in the African Continental Free Trade Area, a GDP of $3.4 trillion and a population of between 1.3 and 1.4 billion. This is a huge market. But one, look at the infrastructure we have. If, for instance, you wanted to take the milk you talked about to Algeria, you would need to go through Europe. We do not have a cargo or any cargo plane in Africa that will take products from Uganda to Algeria. If you want to take flowers, fruits and vegetables, the fruits and vegetables that actually are consumed in West Africa, Doctor, you will bear witness, come from Europe while they have been exported from Uganda. So West Africa imports a good percentage of fruits and vegetables from the East African region, which originate from East African region. So I would want to say that one, how do we leverage the money to get that infrastructure? I do know that within the African Union, the Agenda 63, there is the single African air transport market, but how far has it performed as a flagship project? How far has it performed? If we were to do the statistics today, how many planes, how many buses or bilateral agreements for buses in aviation are there between the countries in East Africa? That's one. On the issue of communication, it will surprise you, for instance, that if you want to call Tanzania, just our neighbor here, if you go to Dar es Salaam, if you want, it is cheaper to call UK when you're in Dar es Salaam than to call Uganda. So I want to imagine.
I want you to focus more on how do we position ourselves as Uganda to take advantage of it, but not so much on the lamentations on what is not going to work. You see what I mean? What can we do more positively to take advantage of the 3.4 billion or trillion market that you talked about GDP plus the 1.4 billion people. How do we position ourselves?
I'm trying to look at the diagnosis so that I can make a prescription. Because if you do not know where the problem is, I'm afraid you will not be able to find how to position yourself. Because the problem in this case is how do you now get like a single, what do you call it, communication within the countries so that it becomes cheaper for you to communicate from country to country. It becomes cheaper by infrastructure to move from one country, goods from one country to another. The third one is the private sector. 90% of our private sector are made of small and medium enterprises. How do we support our small and medium enterprises? Specifically in the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Cooperatives, we have been using one of the things we observed was that value addition was a challenge to our SMEs. They do not have the appropriate technology, the appropriate skills, and the competencies. We are advocating for what we call common user facilities so that they can consolidate these products for off-takers by doing matchmaking for bigger off-takers who can export these products to the different African countries. We have also positioned what we call border export zones because it becomes very difficult for someone, say in the center of the country, to bring his products at the border, and then you find that there's no storage facility, no value addition, even simple value addition such as parking and transshipment. So we have been doing those border export zones. We also need to look at the trade, the illicit finances that we lose in Uganda because of trade misinvoicing, for instance. If you look at the reports of illicit financial flows, you find that trade also makes a big contribution, especially through misinvoicing. How do we have that discussion so that at least the monies that we scoop from the trade, we are able to keep it within the economy to move towards supporting the SDGs? And this may also bring us to a discussion on the legislation, for instance, on beneficial ownership. You look at the statistics, sometimes they look very rosy, but you're not sure whether that money, say of the exports of coffee, exports of gold, exports of what, where do they end? Are they coming back to our economy, or are they go out there in international capitals being used by other multinationals, and we are not benefiting from those trade flows? So those are the major key areas I think we can use to position ourselves for us to be able to benefit from the regional integration and accelerate the SDGs. Thank you.
All right, no, thank you very much, Mr. Ndorere. I mean, he's highlighted a few things around export border zones, addressing issues around misinvoicing, and also supporting SMEs. And I think it's a very spirited conversation that has moved, quite frankly, and I'm glad that PSFU and PASAID and others are working in that space as well. UMA, UNCCI, were within the context of the AFCFTA, a lot of work that is going on around awareness raising, establishing a trade facility that will support SMEs, doing some great market intelligence work. I mean, how many of you know that DRC, which is a next door neighbor to us, import offals outside of Africa, and yet we have them here. And they, import beef outside of Africa, and yet we have them here. And so how do we really aggregate the full potential of the continent and make sure that we can benefit from trade? And I think encourage the private sector to link in some of these conversations. I see our APSA colleagues and STAMVIC colleagues and others who are listening in very strongly, and they have a strong input when it comes to the trade financing agenda. So finally, let me take our colleague from the International Finance Cooperation, IFC, which is part of the World Bank Group, Mr. Zaake, who would be talking to us a bit more from the private sector point of view. You've been listening in and you're saying, they are missing one or two things. So what more can you add from the private sector in terms of financing investments from the private sector, What more can we do in terms of what the government needs to do to create the enabling conditions for private sector to flourish, and share some examples of what Uganda can do. Again, no big grammar.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator, Honorable Ministers, all protocol observed. Let me pick a few low-hanging fruits that I can see. The first one is diaspora remittances. We have Ugandans working abroad and increasing in number. They are looking for credible investment vehicles that they can channel their resources. They don't want to invest abroad, they want to channel their money back. And COVID has taught us that we need to prepare the ground very well for our respective countries. So one of the opportunities that we have is to enable the diaspora Ugandans to identify credible investment vehicles. And if we link them well with the SDGs, we tell a powerful story. That's an opportunity. I think Uganda gets $1.5 billion a year. Kenya gets $4 billion. But also the quality of those remittances, primarily going to consumption, primarily going to real estate and being locked there. And the real estate being done on an individual basis. The way we build houses, sorry to use the example, is like the border way of transport. Where in other countries, you have one pilot, one driver pulling a train. Here you have so many borders. So that's how we are doing our housing. So we need frameworks, credible investment vehicles that can enable the diaspora, because they don't have time to supervise. If they are saving $500 a month, $1,000 a month, they don't have time to supervise what's going on in Uganda. So for me, I see that as the first opportunity. Let me also look at what I've seen. If you look at the fruits and vegetable sector, if you look at the grain sector, and the world today is suffering from acute food shortages. When you look around at this country, and I've been to many countries, I can say that grain and fruits and vegetables are opportunities that we have. But we are doing it mainly in subsistence level, and the cold chain infrastructure, the warehouse infrastructure, the cooperatives that can enable pooling of resources, common user services. For me, these are innovative ways that can really tick the boxes as far as the SDGs are concerned. What are some of the things we are doing? One of them is to support the government so that the reliance by financial institutions on collateral to lend to agribusiness can be reduced. So we are working with the central bank, with the credit reference bureaus to improve the credit scores, to use data, to link that to the national ID so that you can be able to know that the farmers, the borrowers, they can have credit history, they can have a good credit score, and that can reduce the interest rates that are charged per, instead of asking for collateral, and also being able to differentiate between borrowers. Someone borrows from MTN, another one borrows from Airtel, another one borrows from the commercial banks. How do we use data to be able to quickly enable the lenders to provide credit? We're also supporting lending to agribusiness. Agribusiness is the backbone of the economy and one of the levers to reach the SDGs. So we need to find innovative ways to lend to agribusiness. Warehouse receipt system is one of the innovations we are working with the government.
What does it mean? Because we have a lot of people who don't understand those terminologies. So warehouse receipts, what does it mean?
So what's happening now, many grain farmers, even before, first of all, they borrow, let's say from money lenders, to buy seed and plant grain. Even before the grain is ready for harvesting, the money lender is coming and maybe taking the field. The farmers are forced to sell green maize. And yet, if you store, you pack it properly and sell it a few months later from the bumper season, the prices go up. So that desperation of trying to sell maize so that you pay school fees. So the warehouse receipt system affords an opportunity where you can take your grain to a warehouse, that is registered with the Warehouse Receipts Authority, and then you get a receipt. And that receipt, you can discount it at the banks and get money to pay on it, pay as you go, to cover your needs. And the grain that is stored, the longer it stays within the grain stores, you may be able to attract a higher sort of income. So the grain itself becomes collateral, so that you don't have to have land titles, which limits access to finance. So these are some of the innovative measures we are talking about and working with the government to introduce. But in summary, the global capital, there are so many challenges. As Uganda, we compete with so many other countries. There are homegrown solutions, linking the diaspora, creating investment frameworks, coming up with teams of people that can come up with these frameworks that can harness climate smart finance. There's finance that is linked to the SDGs, but you must have credible frameworks, private sector leaning, that can then be able to unlock this financing. And there should be traceability, there should be proper accountability. These kinds of frameworks, I submit, need to be established, then Uganda can harness these opportunities. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Zaake. Establishing appropriate frameworks, and the next question is that what form should they take and how should they look? But I guess that will be a subject for another day when we can delve deeper into that. Right Honorable Kasule, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I think we've had a first round, and I'll just do a little summary of what is emerging from the conversation. I will just now get ready for the audience to have some questions and reactions and reflections, because we don't have too much time, and then we'll come back again to the panel. And I think Raymond, be on standby, because I'll get you at some point listening in to everything and connecting to what you said. Where are the 2-3 things that you think we should put our energies around one more time, and where we can push for accelerated delivery. And so we have been hearing more around the financing frameworks and opportunities for regional cooperation and accelerated delivery for SDGs and Agenda 2063. We've also situated that within the context of our development plans. In this context, 3rd National Development Plan, now segueing into the 4th National Development Plan within the context of our broad 2040 agenda. Now we've been discussing a number of things from the panel, existing instruments that we should continue, advancing new instruments that are available to us, emerging instruments that are available to us, and I'll not try to cluster them here. I think that will be later. But we have touched on the need to look at, again, the macroeconomic levels, ensuring that we have stability in the country. That will continue. Issues around trade financing, the need for us to really take advantage of Africa's potential and what is within the region, and begin to position ourselves as Uganda, be competitive. And in fact, on the issue of Algeria, we were having a conversation recently, and Algeria has $500 million milk market per year. And most likely, even Uganda cannot meet that alone, which means we have to partner with some of the neighboring countries. We have discussed issues around diaspora bonds. It's very interesting, we know, and I know there are some controversies around that, but Ethiopia, for example, funded its Renaissance Dam through its diaspora. We have also heard around capital markets, retirement fund. I'm interested in seeing how we can utilize that, warehouse receipts, household income. In other words, empowering people to be rich, not only food for the stomach, but money for the pockets, also advances the SDG. So these are some of the things that are coming from the panelists, in addition to some of the big ticket issues that the keynote speaker talked about.